What's going on, Dub Nation? Welcome into Warriors Today by Chat Sports. I'm Tyler Smith, and on today's show, we're going to dive into whether or not Golden State has a master plan coming together. This guy, Mike Dunleavy, does he have a plan for Golden State to be competitive in the 2024-25 NBA season? The offseason is coming to a close. We get closer every single day. Does Mike Dunleavy have a plan? He struck out on a couple things this offseason. We'll dive into what Golden State looks like in the near future on today's show. But before we do, we are in a heated subscriber battle in the month of August. All month long, we're trying to get more subscribers than those cronies over at 76ers now. So subscribe to the channel. We need to extend this lead. We only have a 2 subscriber lead so far in the month of August. Subscribe now to the channel, and we'll get started with today's video. All right, so an offseason recap for the Golden State Warriors, right? We have to see what has happened so far before we can dive into what is next. So the Warriors didn't land a second star, right? We know that they went after Paul George. Clippers played a little hardball on that trade, couldn't make a deal done. Then Lauri Markkanen's name comes up in trade talks, and Golden State gets heavily involved, but I guess not as involved as we initially thought because trade talks never really materialized past an initial offer there for Lauri Markkanen. So we're left with these roster moves that Golden State has made throughout this offseason. So out goes Klay Thompson. He walks to the Dallas Mavericks to help contend for a 5th championship in his NBA career, and as well as Chris Paul, who decides to take a 1-year, $11 million deal with the San Antonio Spurs, pairing him up with Victor Wembanyama, somebody who can just feed the ball to Wemby down low in San Antonio. I like that move a lot for Chris Paul, and I think it was a little bit of addition by subtraction, letting him go from Golden State. His time up after one season was done. In goes DeAnthony Melton, Buddy Hield, and Kyle Anderson. Those 3 moves, those are good marginal moves for this team, but I'm not so sure that this roster is a ton improved from what we saw last season. You lose Klay, you lose CP3, and you bring in DeAnthony Melton, Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson. Those are 3 really good players. If you have a championship roster set in stone, your core is together, and you make some moves around the margins to help push you over the edge. Those are great moves in that scenario. I don't know if that pushes this roster past a 10 seed all the way into the legitimate playoff picture this upcoming season. And as far as replacing Klay Thompson goes, they really kind of replaced him in the aggregate. Shout out to Moneyball here, where you pick up a Buddy Hield, you pick up a DeAnthony Melton, and you kind of try to fuse those 2 guys into your rotation to be able to replace what Klay Thompson gave you last year. Because if you look at what DeAnthony Melton and Buddy Hield did give you last year, and shout out to Buddy Hield, by the way, playing 84 regular season games, getting traded over from Indiana to Philadelphia last season, an absolute Iron Man in the NBA. Shout out to Buddy Hield staying durable. But both players over 10 points a night. Obviously, neither one is going to give you insane production in the facilitating category. You're not asking these guys to dish the rock too often. What you're asking Buddy Hield to do is shoot that pill. And what you're asking DeAnthony Melton to do is shoot the ball as well as give you great energy on both sides of the floor. And I think that was something that Klay Thompson's game kind of lacked last year as he ages further and further toward the end of his NBA career. Buddy Hield, on the other hand, is that sharpshooter that you're replacing Klay's 40% three-point shooting with. Obviously, a little bit of a down year actually last year for Buddy Hield. He's been above 40% for many seasons throughout his tenured career to this point. So I think these 2 guys can replace Klay to an extent. You're not really going to replace the chemistry that Steph Curry has with Klay Thompson, but I do think the skill sets that these 2 players provide really allow for Golden State to feel a little bit better about losing Klay Thompson in free agency. I don't feel great about it, breaking up the Splash Brothers, breaking up this core of Steph, Klay, Draymond after all these years. But you may do. Klay's attitude really wasn't where you wanted it to be. He wasn't looking to work with the Warriors on a potential new contract. So you go out and get 2 free agents that were the closest thing to Klay Thompson if you kind of put their skill sets together. So that's the Warriors roster right now. I want to hear from you. Can you grade the Warriors roster for me right now? A, B, C, D, or F? If I had to give an answer, it'd be something around the B- to B range for this Warriors roster. I really don't think it's a championship contender just yet. But from what we've seen so far, they've done what they can in free agency based on, the actions that were outside of their hands. Klay Thompson wanting to leave, the Clippers not wanting to deal Paul George, and Danny Ainge never really being serious about a Lauri Markkanen trade. They've done what they need to do to try to improve this roster as best they can. So give me a grade down below in the comments section. So the Warriors' plan as far as where they head into next season, right? We just talked about the moves the Warriors missed out on. Well, the move that the Warriors could have made potentially was Lauri Markkanen, right? But that's only if they gave up one of Jonathan Kuminga or Brandin Podziemski. Didn't seem like Utah was too interested in Kuminga, so Podziemski was the real kicker in that trade. Golden State didn't want to give him up, So guess what? That tells me that they're leaning into the young talent on this roster. And by young talent, I mean Brandin Podziemski, who is barely legal to drink. Jonathan Kuminga, barely legal to drink. Moses Moody, Trace Jackson Davis. Trace was in college for a good bit. But again, these guys are young talent, cost-controlled players who will be on the Warriors roster for the foreseeable future. And obviously the top two guys, Podziemski and Kuminga, are who the Warriors front office is really pushing their chips in the middle towards, right? Last year, Brandin Podziemski, solid numbers for a rookie, no doubt about it, especially playing 26 minutes a game in this Steve Kerr system. Steve Kerr is not known to trust a lot of players, especially this early on in their careers, and he really gave Brandin Podziemski the keys to be that secondary ball handler on Golden State's roster. Jonathan Kuminga, on the other hand, we saw that big-time leap from him last season. Obviously, the 16 points per game is great. The 53% from the field goal is great. 32% from three needs to be improved. But if we think about how he played during the second half of last season, that number of points per game jumped up to about 19. The field goal percentage stayed relatively the same, and the three-point percentage went all the way up to 36%, which is about league average. So if you get that from Jonathan Kuminga, plus a little bit of added shot creation skill, I think he can really be that second piece that Golden State needs to contend for the long term. But the front office is taking a huge gamble with these guys. There's nothing that tells me right now, aside from a little bit of Jonathan Kuminga's numbers mirroring Jaylen Brown's early on in his career, but Jaylen Brown's team was much more stacked. There wasn't room for him to really blossom until, guys like Kyrie Irving, Gordon Hayward kind of got out of the way there in Boston. Jonathan Kuminga's numbers look similar to his early on, but there hasn't been that competition in the lineup. I guess there was last year with Wiggins and Klay still heavily in the rotation. Jonathan Kuminga better have the second biggest role on this team out of Steph Curry this season, because that's the role that you're putting him in by not going out and acquiring a second star. I believe in Jonathan Kuminga and Brandin Podziemski as the future of this team. I do. I was okay with letting one of them go in order to land a guy like Lauri Markkanen, but I do think that these two players have a bright future. Brandin Podziemski has shown the ability to be a crafty shot creator, a great facilitator, and a scrappy defender. Jonathan Kuminga is that athletic freak, can defend multiple positions on the wing, and can go get you a bucket and create some really highlight-worthy plays. I believe in this crew, but there is still the overarching elephant in the room here that Stephen Curry is still on your roster. My only issue with Jonathan Kuminga and Brandin Podziemski being leaned into as the future of this roster is that you still have a 36-year-old Steph Curry in town. You're still looking for him to be the primary source of offense, to be the number one option on this team, and to hopefully help you make the playoffs and make a run at the championship. But I don't know if Brandin Podziemski and Jonathan Kuminga are going to be able to be that second, third option on a championship contending team over the next couple of seasons. I don't know if Steph's career lines up with their trajectory of being elite talent that supports a championship roster. I'm just not so sure. So up next, we're going to detail whether or not the Warriors have to make a deal here in the coming weeks, have to make a deal during the regular season, or if they might have to wait until 2025 to get any splash deals done. But before we get there, as we're recording this right now, Steph Curry is lighting up France in the gold medal game in the 2024 Paris Olympics. And you can get dripped out in Steph Curry Olympic merch right here. Chatsports.com/CurryUSA to get yours today. They got the blue, they got the white. I'm thinking of getting myself one to rock here on the show. Could be the only time that you ever get any Steph Curry Olympic merch. Hasn't played in one before, won't play in one again with the age that he's at right now. Last ride for Curry, LeBron, Durant. So go get your Steph Curry Olympic merch right now. Chatsports.com/CurryUSA. I'll make it easy for you guys by putting that in the comments and description of today's video, so you guys can click right there and get your Steph Curry Olympic merch right now. So could a trade deadline deal for Golden State right the ship and be able to make them a championship contender this season? Well, we saw it from the Dallas Mavericks, who were sitting at the 8th seed last year. They go out and acquire P.J. Washington and Daniel Gafford, and that pushes them to championship contender status. They made it all the way to the NBA Finals just by making those two moves. Obviously, leaning more into Derek Lively as the season went on as well. But I'm not so sure that that's the case for Golden State, because Dallas had that second star in Kyrie Irving. They had that second scoring punch, and they just went and made those moves around the margins to push themselves to contender status. Golden State doesn't have that second star right now. Obviously, we hope that Jonathan Kuminga and or Brandin Podziemski can kind of step into that role. But Shams Charania said they're not really swinging for big fish anymore because there isn't really any big fish out there at this point. You missed on Paul George. You missed on Markkanen. There's really no big talent out there anymore for Golden State to go out and swing for one move that pushes them to the top. He said Golden State's looking at smaller scale moves as the season approaches. He said they're looking for these smaller scale moves in August and September, kind of more often or more typical than the usual team does. Not a lot of moves made in August and September. He said Golden State's looking at some smaller scale moves. And I got these two players here from the Brooklyn Nets, Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson, as a potential smaller scale move for Golden State to make. Brooklyn, the position they're in right now, these two guys help them stay above water. These two guys help Brooklyn get out of the Cooper Flag sweepstakes in the 2025 NBA draft. And I'm not sure that Brooklyn wants to take any chances. They want the best possible chance they can get to go land Cooper Flag. So these two guys might be on the trade block here. They're looking for draft capital to get them or some young talent, and Golden State has that to offer. Dorian Finney-Smith, do I think that he fits into this roster perfectly? Yes, I do, because he could be that quintessential backup to Jonathan Kuminga, who is a three-point shooting threat, but also defends threes and fours at a high level, even some twos in today's NBA. Dorian Finney-Smith is a textbook. Like, when you look up 3-and-D player in the dictionary, this guy comes up. And if Golden State can land somebody like that and kind of eliminate a little bit of the fat on the roster, trim a little fat off, like by including Andrew Wiggins, Kevon Looney, Gary Payton II, and you go get Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith, I think that trims some of the fat off this roster, makes you a little less deep, but kind of the perfect amount of depth on this Golden State Warriors roster. I think this move would be very successful for Golden State to make before the season begins. But I want you to tell me, will the Warriors make a trade before the start of the season? I want to hear from you guys down in the comments section. Type Y for yes, type N for no if you guys think Golden State's going to make a trade or not. Now, I still think a big move must be made. I don't think that this team, even for the next 2 seasons that Steph Curry's on contract for, are prepared to contend for a championship with the roster that's currently in place. I think that if you get a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson, you're still kind of in the same place, right? Your ceiling's probably around a 6-7 seed with that roster in place, and I don't know if you're going to be in line for a slew of upsets there in the Western Conference playoffs, even if you do get there by making that move. I still think a secondary scoring option has to be in the cards for Golden State over the next 2 seasons, or Steph might want out. We'll talk about that more in a second. But Shams said that Golden State and Mike Dunleavy are comfortable with the roster going into this season if a deal can't be made. I mean, I think it's just a cop-out, basically saying that they're cool with the roster they have in place right now because there's really no more moves to be made out there. So I'm not really taking too much from this comment. I'm sure Mike Dunleavy is pissed that he didn't make a big splash in the trade market this offseason. Couldn't make much free agency splashes because, you know, when Paul George declined his player option, you were out of the running for him because he didn't have any money at the time. So no big trade splashes. I think it has to be one toward the deadline this season or next. And who's that big trade deadline deal? As of right now, because we don't have a star disgruntled or asking out for a trade right now, I think it's Julius Randle, who kind of just seems like the odd man out in New York in that roster. And I think if you bring him to Golden State, he can be that secondary scoring punch, take the ball out of Curry's hands a little bit and let him run off the ball. And you get some Julius Randle ISOs in there. He's been a good, solid three-point shooter since arriving in New York. He's led them to a playoff 4-5 seed as the only option on the team. Like, before Brunson got there, he took the Knicks to a 4-5 matchup in the postseason. Like, Julius Randle is becoming underrated as as time goes on. He's becoming underrated. And I think he'd be a really good addition to this Golden State team that really lacks that second scoring punch. And I hope to make a trade like this, Golden State will be in the playoff picture, because if you're sitting at 13 in the West, then what's the point in making a trade? You're not going to jump all the way up into the playoff picture if you're at that point at the deadline. And I believe in Jonathan Kuminga and Brandin Podziemski, but you cannot have a repeat of last year. You can't have 3 straight seasons of Golden State being in the lower half of the playoff bracket or basically not making the playoffs altogether like they did last year as the 10 seed, losing in the first game of the play-in. Because guess what? Stephen Curry will ask out. If you look at his contract here, he's on bill for the next 2 seasons, $55.5 million, basically $60 million next year. He's going to want out. He's going to want to go compete for a championship as his career comes to a close if you don't make a big move. And I know I've gotten a ton of heat for this, and I never said the Golden State Warriors should trade Steph Curry. I've never even believed that. The Golden State Warriors should never trade Steph. But what does Steph want? What does he want to do? And if this team's not helping him contend for a championship, you have to take that into consideration. That's why Golden State needs to make a big splash move here in the next 2 seasons. And maybe it isn't this season. Maybe it's 25-26 when a big star becomes disgruntled and Golden State ends up getting in the trade talks for them. The thing that needs to happen, though, is Golden State needs to be in on that player. Whatever big star decides that I want out next, Golden State must be in on that talent. Because if they're not, then you can expect Steph Curry to be disgruntled. And you can expect him to become the next big star that requests a trade instead of Golden State going out and acquiring one of those players. So go get a second scorer next to Curry, and you can ride out the rest of his career in Golden State, no questions asked. So with that said, who is that guy? Who is your ideal second star next to Stephen Curry? I want to hear from you. Let me know down in the comments a name that you think could be a championship contending piece for this Golden State Warriors roster next to Steph Curry. I want to hear from you down in the comments section. And that'll be the end of today's show. Golden State's plan, I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's the position they're in right now. They kind of get to play the cards that they've been dealt. Subscribe to the channel here. Remember, we're in that August sub battle all month long against those frauds over at 76ers Now. We got to extend that lead in the August sub battle with them. So go on and hit that subscribe button, youtube.com/WarriorsTV. We'll see you in the next one. Go Dubs.